This woman made headlines last week thanks to an incredible discovery she made in her garden. Unsuspectingly, she bought a house with a huge war bunker buried in her backyard. And curiously, that wasn't even the strangest thing they discovered, because what they found inside the bunker was truly incredible. She didn't even find the secret door to this bunker in her garden. The entrance to this huge metal bunker consisted of a tunnel nearly 100 meters in length. And she and her husband found that entrance when they were busy with the major cleaning of their own house. They had just bought this house and were still busy exploring everything. But this discovery really made the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. The floor of the scullery had been sounding hollow for a while, but when they saw this metal hatch under one of the cupboards, they were quite shocked. They decided to investigate. The cupboard had clearly been put there by the previous residents to hide this hole, because when they bought the house, the entire room was empty. They had taken all the furniture with them, everything except this cupboard. It was time to find out why the previous occupants had gone to so much trouble to keep this secret. The cupboard was pushed aside and the manhole cover was exposed, and what they found in it was incredible. Once the cupboard was gone and a hole appeared, homeowner Lindsay found it hard to believe what she saw. She thought there might have been a small cellar underneath, a place where the previous family might have stored a sneaky wine stash. But the hole went some 30 meters deep into the ground. An old rusty staircase hung at the edge of the hole, and it was time to discover what was in the depths of this tunnel. Her husband went down first, and then they did not even know that this tunnel would lead to the huge bunker in the backyard. It was a tight opening, but her husband Flint just fitted through it. With a torch, she shone after him as her husband disappeared into the dark hole. "See anything yet, baby?" she called after him. Because when he stood at the bottom of the shaft, he saw a long tunnel, perhaps 100 meters long. Flint ran through the tunnel and Lindsay followed him via a walkie-talkie above ground. Soon the tunnel left the house, and so they emerged into the backyard. A long straight corridor lay at Flint's feet, but in the distance light could be seen an opening that would lead outside. Or was there a lamp hanging here that had been burning for years? Indeed, the evidence followed him all the way to the source of the light, as there was a long yellow electricity cable across the bottom of the tunnel. "I think I'm standing right above you." She called out loudly to the turf beneath her feet, and then she saw it. On the turf right in front of her feet was a small piece of concrete sticking out. It was between some rocks, so she had never noticed it. But this little gray piece of stone was clearly man-made. She caught up with her brother, and while her husband continued his way underground through the tunnel, the two of them started digging. In no time, they had reached the top of the tunnel. They looked down and saw her husband Flint standing there. And that was not the only thing they had just unearthed. Flint told them there was a big iron door down here, but then he couldn't get it open on his own. Lindsay and her brother jumped into the hole with him, and so the three of them tried to pull the door. It was enormously heavy. What would be hidden behind it? How could there have just been a giant tunnel under their house without them knowing it? Lindsay fell silent for a moment, looking in amazement at the long tube she had just taken a seat in. "Are you going to help us?" She then heard her husband call out. "Oh yes, of course, I wandered off for a moment," she declared. The three of them pulled as hard as they could on the rusty handle of the door, and with a big bang it slammed open. What was this place like? The room was filled with old glass jars and bottles. According to the labels, they were all filled with whiskey and rum, and what struck her most was the year, 1945. These bottles were over 77 years old, she exclaimed in amazement. Lindsay was hugely impressed and almost wanted to call the newspaper at that point, but this discovery was nothing compared to what they were about to find at any moment. Luckily, her neighbor was a contractor and had a small excavator on standby. Otherwise, this excavation would have taken weeks. Then they had only managed to excavate a small part. The object was being thoroughly examined from outside, but the underground trio would be the first to make a gigantic discovery. Indeed, the first thing Lindsay, Flint, and her brother found was a large suitcase. It was old and rusty, but that didn't necessarily say anything about its contents. It was as if Carl, Lindsay's brother, had secret gifts, because secret documents was exactly what they found. And not just any secret documents. It was a report coming from 1945, which detailed all submarines of the Allied Navy unmarked. They could not believe their eyes. These papers might have made the entire Second World War end differently. The troops probably got stuck here during the invasion, and these documents never saw the light of day again. But there were many more great discoveries to be made, and those they would soon come across. The next discovery was made some 20 meters away in a new room. There was a cupboard that was still so perfectly intact that it looked like it could have been used yesterday. Clothes were still neatly folded, bed sheets were in a pile, and weapon holsters were neatly stored. The most important part of the bunker was uncovered. Cautiously, Flint, Lindsay, and Carl climbed up a ladder. They must be close to the turf now, because they heard the excavator that was busy overhead getting louder and louder. The excavator had hit the highest part of the bunker and was digging away the first shovels of sand. Light shone through the room again, now showing crisply where they stood. Lindsay could not believe her eyes. They had to share this with the world. They were at the bunker's observation tower, and here all the equipment was still there. It was perfectly preserved and seemed brand new. Huge binoculars, documents, and even anti-aircraft guns were present. They never found any soldiers. They probably got away just in time. But it was clear that they had to do something with all this stuff, and of course, the bunker itself. So they decided to do the following. It was enough to fill an entire museum with, Lindsay explained, and that was exactly what they did. Most of the bunker was excavated and restored to its former glory. And what does the pride of their quest look like now? What is the state of the viewing dome? The dome has been fully excavated and now proudly overlooks the surrounding dunes, as it did at the time, Lindsay said. They have placed puppets to simulate the soldiers present at the time, which adds to the realistic effect, she explains. Lindsay and her family have since moved in. They lovingly run the museum, but unfortunately could no longer live peacefully at their old location. Besides, the escape tunnel has become a permanent part of the museum. The bunkers now stand proudly above the dunes and are visited by nearly 1 million people every year. They made admission free so that as many people as possible could visit it. And so it didn't take long before hundreds of people came to take a look at these special bunkers every day. Even though the war is a dark page in our past, I think it is important for people to know what all happened here, and these bunkers are a part of that. As people, we cannot look to the future if we don't dare to look at where we came from once in a while. Interviewer: But why did you guys decide to move? Lindsay: The tunnel is also part of the museum. It's how the soldiers were able to escape, and we wanted visitors to experience that too. Of course, we couldn't live in a place where hundreds of people walk through every day. But closing off the tunnel from the museum and keeping it as a house I thought was selfish. This is a part of everyone's past.